Hello everyone. A couple of weeks ago I put up a video on how to paper piece a log cabin block. Hopefully by now you've completed a few of those and maybe even a bunch of those, and you're ready to think about how to assemble them into a quilt top. I'll be walking through the process of how to do this in the next couple of weeks because I wanted to break this down into some smaller segments that are easier to digest. This first segment will be on the thought process of how to get your how to assemble your quilt from beginning to completion. So it'll just be a look at that, and then we'll be assembling the quilt blocks into quadrants is how I'm going to do it on this one. Today we're going to go over what to do with your log cabin block once you've got it paper pieced. So you're at a great place now. We're going to start with the assembly. One of the first things you're going to want to do is lay them out in the order that you are going to assemble them. One of the next things you want to consider is how you're going to quilt your quilt. And you want to consider this before you ever get to the point of assembling your blocks, because it may make a difference in how you do it. So for example, will you be sending the whole quilt off to a long armor? Will you be doing it at home on a home sewing machine? You might even be sending it off to somebody who hand quilts it. So all this goes into your consideration. Would you prefer to work in smaller sections on your sewing machine rather than rolling up the whole thing in the quilt and the whole quilt and trying to fit it into the head of your machine? If you would prefer to work in smaller sections, it'll add a few steps to your quilting when you're quilting it yourself on your home machine, but it will be easier because you'll only be working with smaller sections. If you're going to be positioning the whole thing at once, it might be easiest, the easiest way to do it would probably be by rows. And the way you would do this is you would take two rows, or you would take your top row, and I begin working at the top and go to the bottom. And you'll take these over to your machine and put in your first row of stitches here and your first row of stitches here. Keep in mind, if you have if it needs to be in a certain orientation, that you want to be sure and carry them to your machine with the right side on your right side so that you can feed them into the machine in this order. This way, all the seams and intersections can be pressed in one direction on one row and on the opposite direction in the next row. And the reason for this is so that they will nest when you assemble your quilt. What you're going to want to do is find, say, a quarter of your quilt. Now, I don't have my entire quilt showing because it just wouldn't fit under the camera field, but this is 1/4 of it. And you would do it the same way as you would do with the rows, only you would take it this way and this way. So you got your quarter of a quilt here, and you would take this over to your machine and you would sew here and you would sew here. When you press it, you're going to want to press your seams from your top one in one direction, say this direction, and you're going to want to press your other seams in the opposing direction. And this is so that where they come together, they will nest very nicely when you take your next set of stitches. So I'm using a 1/4 inch foot, and it has a seam guide here to guide the edge of the fabric. So it will ride along it just like this. I'll put that in. I'm going to go over and I'm going to go to my quilt menu. I'm going to set this on a 1/4 inch. That should give me a 1/4 inch on my piecing foot. I'm going to knock this from 2.0 millimeters to 1.5, and I'm going to bring my needle just a couple of clicks to the right. And the reason I'm doing that is because there is some room in the fold when I stitch it together. So I want to stitch on a scant 1/4 inch. I'm going to press this to the right, so my seam allowance underneath is going in this direction. This piece I'll press to the left. Now it's time to join your 2 pieces together. So you're going to fold your top piece over your bottom piece, and then you're going to look for your center line or your center seam right here. And this is the one that you want to match up. So you want to make sure that, like, you pressed one to one side and you've pressed the other to the other side, and you're going to pin on the left side and on the right side, and that's going to hold it in place until you feed it into your machine. So now that I have this piece together, what I was hoping for is a very close corner join up here, and it looks like I have that. So that's what I was looking for. I have pressed to the dark side of the fabric because all of these are dark. It might show through had I pressed toward the light fabric. So that's something to keep in mind when you're pressing. All 4 quadrants will be done in this way. The next thing that I'll do is I'll fold my 2 pieces that I've just joined exactly in half, and I'm going to look at this edge, and what I want to make sure of is that both sides, this side and this side, are exactly the same. And the reason I'm going to measure this is because my border will be coming along 2 sides. So I want this border, is 16. Well, somehow I realized when I got to editing that I was missing a section, and I had taken a still rather than a movie. So I'm just going to go over very quickly what I've done before. And so the last thing that you did was you measured from here to here at whichever side is the top side of your segment, and then you want to come into the center and you want to find the exact center. And it may be, these are pieced, if you've been doing paper piecing, it may be that your exact center is right here, but it could be that it's a little off, maybe on one side or the other. So you want to find where your exact center is, and you want to fold that piece together, and you want to put a crease right at your exact center, wherever that is. And then you want to come along and do the same with your borders. Let me switch for just a minute. So I have a border piece here. In this photo, it hasn't been cut, but disregard this because what you're doing is the exact same thing. You're just folding it in half and finding the center. So I have this folded toward me, and you have found your center, and you have found your center on your border. This is the exact center. So you want to open this piece back up, and then you want to open this piece back up, and you want to put the 2 right sides together. And so this will be open, the right sides together, and you're going to come up to your corner, and you're going to pin your center, and then you're going to pin your outside edges right here so that everything is exact across the top. You've got a 16-inch, on this one you've got a 16-inch quadrant, and you've got a 16-inch piece of fabric. So they should line up perfectly. You just want to make sure they're lined up at the center. Then you want to come to the inside, and you want to put a pin here and a pin here. If you were working on a quilt and there was any fullness, you might have to put extra pins. And so you would put a pin here and a pin here, say a pin here, and a pin here. And what you were doing is you're trying to evenly distribute the fullness between the pins so that no one of these sections here is more full than any of the others. And then, so it's probably not going to be a problem on this little quadrant, but if you were putting borders on a very large quilt, you might find that there is fullness. And usually the reason why is the more seams that you have as you go along, the more opportunity that you will have for fullness along the border of your quilt. And you don't want it to be wavy and on the outside border because it won't lay flat. So what you want to do is you want to ease in the fullness and cut exact borders to match the outside of your quilt. And this is called easing in, where you have it like this and you have the fabric evenly distributed. Another thing that you might do is if you are feeding it into your sewing machine, you can lay the side that it has the most fullness toward the bottom of your, or toward your feed dogs. So your feed dogs are coming along like this and they are feeding your fabric in from the bottom, and your presser foot just is sitting on top of your fabric, and it will actually, where you've got the two pieces of fabric, it will feed in the bottom at a slightly faster or quicker rate than it's feeding in the top. So if you have a fuller side, put it towards your feed dogs. Sometimes you'll see me using a walking foot or an even feed foot, and that is helping feed the top fabric in at the exact same time as the bottom fabric at the exact same rate. So that can help if you have a big bulky thing like a quilt, or maybe you have something slick like satin or silk, something that's very slick. The two sides might be feeding in very unevenly because it's difficult to work with those fabrics. And so you might see a walking foot in a situation like that. But this is all about trying to ease in your fabric if there is any fullness. So that's how you would do that. I'll move on to the next segment now. Now that I have my top piece applied, I'm going to apply a piece to the border side, or the side border. And I've already cut it, and I found the center of it, and I'm going to match it up to the center to include the center to include the border. And so since I found the center of both of those pieces, I'll open this up, and I'll open this one up. And I've just creased those slightly. It's probably not going to show in the camera. And I'm going to pin the center. And then I'm going to pin at the outside edge. And I'm going to pin at the other outside edge. And then I'm going to add a pin about halfway between them. Now, if there is any fullness on either the border or the blocks, this is how you work it in. You just check, and you check for fullness. And if you find any, then you add more pins so that it's equally spaced between them as you sew. It looks like this is pretty good as far as the fullness goes. So I don't think I'm going to have any problems with it. I might add a pin right there just because it's bulky. Anyway, back to the machine. Now I have my first quadrant completed. The process will be exactly the same for all 4 quadrants of this quilt. The next step will be setting it on a piece of backing and batting for quilting. So now let's talk about Franken batting. That's what I have here today. So I have taken pieces of batting and I've sewn a straight line down these. And this is how I get rid of all my scraps. If you're a quilter, you may have basket like this of pieces somewhere. And these are pieces that have come off of great big quilts, but not so big that it's used everything that has come with it. So this is how I like to get rid of the batting. You'll notice that, like this particular one, you can see that they're two different colors when it's here, but you won't be able to see that when you have your quilt put together. So this is all hidden, even with a difference in color like this. The way that I've done these is I've taken a zigzag stitch. I've cut them very straight and I've stitched them together with a zigzag stitch. There'll be some stretching as you stitch this out, but it'll be fine. It won't show at all, and it makes a nice flat seam. So this is how I've joined these together. I also tried another way that I wasn't too thrilled with, and I'm going to mention it really quick. I tried seam tape, and it burnt my batting. This won't show through either because I've already looked. I have a white backing and I can't see it. And I've already tested it with my quilt blocks to make sure that it's not going to show through. But I wasn't happy with the seam tape, and it didn't melt to the fabric. It might work better with polyester, but this is cotton batting that I'm using. So that's something to consider if you want to try the seam tape. I wasn't thrilled with it. I ended up going back and taking a zigzag stitch just like I did with the others. But I want to be honest about the things that don't go so well as the ones that do. Now I have my backing and my batting laying under my quilt. So the backing you want to make sure is facing down, and your batting has a softer side and it has a rough side that looks like it has little balls. It just will feel a little bit rougher. You want to make sure that side is down. And then you want to smooth out your whole quilt top and make sure that it's nice and flat and doesn't have any wrinkles on the underside. I ironed my backing because I wanted to make sure that it was nice and flat. And I don't usually iron the batting because it doesn't matter. It won't show. If I have one and I pull it out of a package, sometimes I'll let it hang for a day or so off of my staircase, and that will let it stretch out a little bit if it's been compressed. But that's as far as the preparation goes for that. Now I'm going to take this over to the sewing machine, and I'm going to lay in some basting stitches right along the edge and down here and across here. And that will make it easier when I'm quilting it. Some people like to quilt with safety pins when they're doing quilt as you go. I don't like that because I don't like to have to watch out for the pins. And so to me, it's just as easy to lay down some basting stitches real fast. So a basting stitch, almost every sewing machine should have it. It's just a long stitch. Mine is like a 6mm stitch. So a regular stitch on my sewing machine, if it's just normally, would be about 2mm. So this is a lot bigger. So I'm not sure if this is going to show or not. Let's see how much I can. What I have is a thread here, and these are basting stitches, and I want to show just how quickly you can pull these out. What I'm doing is I'm pulling on a top stitch, and I'll just pull a few out. And so you can see how fast they pull out. But if you get one started and you take a snip under it, you can pull out a big section at once. And that's what I'm doing here because I need these along the edge. So I get one started, and then I've got about 4 inches of stitches, 3 or 4 inches. And I just can keep going fairly quickly. So don't be reluctant to put these in because they really don't take that long to take out. And it's fairly quick. One last thing to mention at this point is that I'm going to switch over to a walking foot, which just helps feed the top fabric into the sewing machine at the same rate as the bottom fabric. That's what this little lever is for. As the needle bar or the needle bar goes up and down, it makes your feet move along at the same rate as the bottom. And the other thing is a pair of garden gloves. And I like these because I don't know if you can see it, but they've got little rubber grippers all over them, and this will help me grip the fabric. So that's it for this week's segment. Your goals this week is to assemble your quilt top into quadrants, and then you want to, based on your backing and your batting, and then come back next week and we'll go over how to quilt your quilt. Don't forget to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell for more compulsive quilting and embroidery videos.